Picture this. You're in your V8 Ford Mustang, engine grumbling, bad shining, legacy behind you. Then a minivan pulls up beside you and smokes you off the line. How could this happen? How could a legendary V8 Ford Mustang, America's muscle icon, be humiliated by something designed to carry soccer gear and spill juice boxes? Get ready, these aren't just slow cars. These are Ford Mustangs that let the name down. The Ford Mustang and the V8 have always been a love story for the ages. But not every chapter is a happy one. There were years when owning a V8 Mustang didn't mean dominance, it meant disappointment. This list dives into the most infamous moments when the V8 Ford Mustang couldn't even outrun a minivan. These aren't performance monsters, these are the Mustang misfires you never thought existed. Let's expose the truth behind the badge. Top 5. 1975 Ford Mustang 2 Ghia V8, 302. It had a V8 under the hood, the Mustang badge on the fenders, and velvet in the cabin. But when the light turned green, it didn't leap, it politely asked for permission. This wasn't the Mustang you imagined burning rubber at the strip or tearing up the streets of San Francisco. No, this was a Mustang in name only, a grand illusion, wrapped in chrome, velour, and wishful thinking. The mid-1000s 970S were nothing short of an extinction event for American performance cars. The world was changing fast, and not in favor of raw horsepower. Gasoline prices were soaring thanks to the oil crisis. Insurance rates punished young drivers with muscle under the hood, and newly imposed federal emissions standards were strangling every engine from Detroit to Dearborn. Ford, like every other automaker, had a serious identity crisis. The Mustang, once the rebellious icon of youth and power, now had to play by a new set of rules. Selling fire-breathing machines was no longer profitable, or even socially acceptable. Instead, Ford needed to build something economical, practical, and dare we say, refined. Enter the 1975 Ford Mustang 2 Ghia. On paper, it was a Mustang, but under the skin, it was built on the humble Ford Pinto platform, a car never designed for speed or style. The result was a smaller, lighter Mustang, tailored not for performance, but for luxury, or at least what passed for luxury in 1975. Forget scoops and spoilers, this Mustang came dressed in velvet and chrome. The Ghia trim level meant padded vinyl roofs, ornate opera windows, wood grain dash accents, wire wheel covers, and thickly cushioned velour seats that felt more like your grandmother's living room than a cockpit. The steering was light, the ride was soft, and the ambiance was more continental cruiser than canyon carver. And yet, buried deep inside that wall-to-wall velour and decorative trim, Ford offered a sliver of hope. The optional 302 cubic inch V8. The same engine that once powered tire-shredding Boss Mustangs and Mach 1S now returned for one last performance. Or so it seemed. Here's the twist. That once mighty 302 V8 had been reduced to a shell of its former self. Thanks to small gear regulations, detuned cam profiles, restrictive catalytic converters, and low compression engineering, the 1975 version produced a dismal 140 horsepower. And that's not a typo. It was a tragic fall from grace for an engine once feared on the drag strip. Worse still, it was paired with a sluggish 3-speed automatic transmission. No manual, no sport mode, just 3 gears and a prayer. And with over 3,000 pounds of Mustang 2 wrapped around it, most of that weight being trim, insulation, and padding. The power-to-weight ratio was downright embarrassing. The result? A 0 to 60 time of 10.5 seconds. Let that sink in. That's slower than a base model 2020 Toyota Corolla. Slower than a used Dodge Caravan with a dented bumper and a family of 5 on board. Slower, even, than some riding lawnmowers, assuming they're freshly sharpened and running downhill. But the real heartbreak wasn't just the numbers. It was the optics. This Mustang didn't just underperform, it looked like it should underperform. The padded roof, the dainty wheels, the opera windows. They all screamed leisure, not legacy. This wasn't the muscle car Steve McQueen would chase through the streets of San Francisco. This was what his accountant would buy after retirement. And yet, it sold. Big time. The The Mustang II Ghia appealed to a new audience, buyers who wanted comfort over cornering, softness over speed, and economy over excitement. They appreciated the fuel mileage. They loved the quiet ride. They embraced the ease of an automatic and the luxury of velour. Ford moved nearly 190,000 Mustang II in 1975, and a good chunk of them were Ghia models. On paper, it was a success. But in the shadows of that sales chart, something sacred was slipping away. The Mustang wasn't a leader anymore. It wasn't a pioneer or an icon. It was a follower. It had traded its roar for a whisper, its edge for elegance, its soul for sales. And if this was the new face of the Mustang V8, then what came next might not just disappoint you, it might make you question whether the Mustang name still meant anything at all. Top 4. 1980 Ford Mustang V8 255 Windsor. It said V8 on the spec sheet, but it whispered on the street. This was a Mustang that promised to bring back the roar, and instead left behind a quiet sigh. The kind of sigh you hear when dreams fall just short of reality. By 1980, Ford was still licking its wounds from the Mustang II era, a time when the Mustang name was stretched, padded, downsized, and softened until it was barely recognizable. But the future seemed bright. The launch of the Fox Body Mustang in 1979 was a breath of fresh air. Finally, the Mustang looked like a Mustang again. Long hood, short deck, slanted nose, and just enough aggression to spark hope. The Fox Body platform was lighter, tighter, and more modern than the Pinto-based Mustang II. Enthusiasts thought, this is it, the comeback, the return of the king. Ford offered a range of engines to suit various budgets and regulations, from an anemic 88 horsepower inline-six to a turbocharged four-cylinder with surprising spirit. But for the purists, there was only one spec that mattered, the V8. That's where the 255 Windsor came in. On paper, it seemed like a logical choice. It was based on the venerable 302 Windsor, an engine with a fearsome reputation from the late 60s and early 70s. But this version was neutered, shrunk to meet EPA demands, strangled by emissions equipment, and detuned until it was barely recognizable. Ford hoped it would tick the right boxes. V8 badge? Check. Respectable fuel economy? Check. Insurance friendly? Double check. It was a compromise, an engine designed to appease everyone and thrill no one. From the outside, though, the 1980 Mustang could fool you. With its redesigned grills, sporty wheels, louvered taillights, and clean fastback profile, it looked ready to eat asphalt. It borrowed styling cues from earlier GTs and even hinted at Cobra aggression. The stance was low, the lines sharp. It had all the makings of a performance icon reborn. And then you turned the key. What you got wasn't a growl. It wasn't even a murmur, it was a cough. The 255 cubic inch V8 managed just 119 horsepower and 194 pound-feet of torque. And that was gross, not net. That's barely more than a four-cylinder Camry today. And when paired with the lethargic 3-speed automatic transmission, the result was one of the most sluggish V8 Mustangs ever made. 0 to 60 in 13.5 seconds. Let that number burn into your brain. 13.5 seconds. That's slower than a 1980 Volvo wagon. Slower than a diesel Mercedes. Slower than a Mustang II, yes. This V8 Mustang was slower than the very car it was supposed to redeem. Even more insulting, Ford marketed the 255 as a premium option. You paid extra for the V8 badge and the pride that came with it, only to be left in the dust by station wagons and econoboxes. The engine bay had more empty space than firepower. There was no satisfying rumble, no torque-laden launch, no tire-screeching joy. Just a quiet, heavy sigh every time you hit the gas. And it didn't end there. Inside, the disappointment continued. Sure, the interior was a step up from the Mustang II's disco-era nightmare, but that wasn't saying much. The dash was plasticky, the seats were thin, the layout uninspired. The optional 8-crack stereo might have been the most exciting part of the whole package. The cabin was less cockpit, more commuter pod. No flair, no fire, no fun. The 255 Windsor wasn't just underwhelming, it was the Mustang's quiet cry for help. In trying to straddle the line between regulation and reputation, Ford had created a car that pleased no one. It looked the part, it carried the name, but it failed to deliver on the one thing every Mustang should have: soul. This wasn't a rebirth, it was a half-hearted resurrection. A V8 in name only. 2 decades, 2 V8 Mustangs, and 2 of the biggest disappointments in pony car history. And if you thought this one hurt, wait until you see what came next: a Mustang that looked like a predator, but ran like prey. Top 3. 1979 Ford Mustang Cobra Turbo 2.3L. It wore the Cobra name and promised venom, but all it could deliver was a stuttering cough. This was the Mustang's attempt to slither back into performance territory, not with muscle, but with turbocharged technology. The badge said Cobra, the looks said Predator, but the reality? It hissed more than it struck. The year was 1979, and the Mustang needed a reset. The Mustang II had outstayed its welcome. It was bloated, underpowered, and had turned one of the most iconic names in American performance into a punchline. Ford knew they had to act fast, and so came the Foxbody era. The new Mustang was a dramatic improvement. It was leaner, lower, and better looking. It ditched the Pinto roots and adopted a more aerodynamic shape. It actually looked like a Mustang again, or at least a 1980s interpretation of one. To performance-starved fans, it felt like hope. And then Ford dropped a surprise: a turbocharged 2.3-liter inline-4 engine under the hood. At a time when V8s were gas-guzzling dinosaurs, this seemed like a masterstroke. The idea was simple: deliver V8-level performance in a lighter, more efficient package. Add in the revival of the Cobra nameplate, and expectations soared. It certainly looked the part. The Cobra version of the Foxbody came with flat black graphics, bold side stripes, rear window louvers, a functional hood scoop, and aggressive wheels. It wore its muscle heritage on its sleeve. It looked like it was ready to pounce. And that's what made what followed all the more disappointing. On paper, the numbers weren't terrible for the time: 132 horsepower and 142 pound-feet of torque. Not world-beating, but not laughable either, especially in a car that weighed just over 2,800 pounds. But once you got behind the wheel, it became painfully clear that this Cobra was more garden snake than king of the jungle. Turbo lag was the car's Achilles heel. You'd stomp on the gas, and wait, and wait. Sometimes you'd count to 3, sometimes 4. Then, just as you were about to give up, a mild push would finally arrive. It wasn't thrilling. It was frustrating. Like trying to box with gloves made of molasses. The engine had other issues too. It ran hot. Dangerously hot. Owners reported frequent knocking, pinging, and even cracked pistons. The turbo setup was prone to heat soak, making performance drop off sharply after just a few spirited pulls. The intercooling system was minimal, and the engine bay became a sauna. Even worse, the car didn't back up its looks. 0 to 60 came in at around 10 seconds flat, slower than a base model Toyota Celica of the same year, slower even than some 6-cylinder family sedans. The suspension, while slightly stiffer than the base model, couldn't make up for the lack of acceleration. Drivers who bought into the Cobra fantasy were met with a reality of disappointment. The interior didn't help its case. Sure, the dashboard was futuristic for the time, but most of it was hard plastic, creaky trim, and flimsy switches. The bucket seats offered minimal support. And forget about driving enjoyment. The steering was vague, the gear shifts felt rubbery, and the brakes were barely adequate. Even the optional TRX performance package with its upgraded tires and suspension tweaks couldn't save the experience. The tragedy was that this car had so much potential. It was a bold experiment. Turbocharging, modern styling, a return to performance branding. It was supposed to be the Mustang reborn for a new age of efficiency and engineering. But it felt half-baked. It didn't have the technology or tuning finesse to make it work. Instead of a legend, it became a lesson. Ford's first turbocharged Mustang was a swing and a miss. It had the branding, it had the ambition, it had the aesthetics, but it lacked the engineering to back it all up. The Cobra name had been tarnished, not celebrated. But this wasn't the end of the turbo dream. Ford wasn't done with forced induction, not even close. Because coming next was a Mustang that looked even more unhinged, and somehow delivered even less. Top 2. 1994 Ford Mustang GT 5LV8 automatic. It had the legendary 5 badge, a throaty exhaust, and a brand new body. But all that swagger came with one unexpected twist, an automatic that dragged it down like a boat anchor. This wasn't just any Mustang, it was the rebirth of an icon. But if you chose the wrong spec, you didn't get a legend, you got a lounge act. By the early 1990s, the Fox-body Mustang was running on borrowed time. It had soldiered on for over a decade, through disco, grunge, and everything in between. But the design was tired, sales were slipping, the competition was catching up. Ford needed something new. Enter the SN95. Launched in 1994, it was a complete redesign built on an evolved Fox platform. It featured rounded lines, modern curves, and a dramatic departure from the boxy silhouette of the ADS. It was a Mustang made for the new millennium, while still carrying echoes of the past under the hood. The famous 5LV8, the same small block Windsor that had powered countless GTs, LXs, and dragstrip dreams throughout the ADS. It made 215 horsepower and 285 pound-feet of torque, and in the manual version it could hustle from 0 to 60 in around 6.5 seconds. Not exactly Corvette slaying, but respectable, and more importantly, it felt raw, mechanical, alive. The manual GT had personality. The shifts were firm. The torque hit hard at low revs. The car could lay rubber, bark second gear, and punch through traffic like a real muscle machine. It brought back memories of 5 Mustangs carving up back roads or dominating Friday night cruises. But here's the catch. If you ticked the wrong box at the dealership, you got the 4-speed automatic, and with it, a very different Mustang. Suddenly, the 5's bark lost its bite. The automatic sapped the life out of the power band. Shifts were slow and lazy. Gear changes felt like they were mediated by a peace treaty negotiation committee. The engine wanted to run, but the transmission held it back. 0 to 60 now took nearly 8 seconds, more than a second slower than the manual version. In the world of performance cars, that's an eternity, especially when you're packing a V8 and a GT badge. Worse, the auto sapped the drama. No aggressive downshifts, no manual control, just mushy throttle response and a general sense of disappointment. You'd floor it, and instead of surging forward, the car would pause, ponder, then reluctantly accelerate like it was doing you a favor. Even worse, this wasn't the rare spec, it was the common one. Thanks to insurance incentives, daily driver convenience, and dealer stocking habits, most buyers ended up with the automatic. That meant most 1994 Mustang GTs on the road were neutered right off the lot. A muscle car muzzled by its own transmission. Handling didn't save it either. The SN95 was heavier than the outgoing Fox body, and despite suspension upgrades, it still felt nose-heavy and understeer prone. Push it through corners and the soft dampers revealed their true nature, tuned more for comfort than confidence. Inside, there were upgrades. Dual airbags, contoured seats, a more ergonomic layout. The plastics were still hard, but at least they were shaped better. And the optional Mach 460 sound system? Booming, bold, and often louder than the V8 rumble it was supposed to complement. You heard the speakers more than the engine. And that sums up the 1994 Mustang GT Automatic perfectly. A car that felt like it was trying to be modern, but forgot to be exciting. A car that looked fast, sounded fast, but didn't move fast. The ingredients were there, but someone left the fire out of the recipe. The 1994 Mustang GT Automatic wasn't a bad car, but it was a missed opportunity. It carried the 5 legacy, wore the right badges, and had all the muscle car moves on paper, but when it came time to deliver, it flinched. For Mustang fans, it was a bittersweet chapter. A return to form, with the edges dulled. But Ford wasn't done experimenting, because deep inside Dearborn, another project was brewing. One with a smaller engine, more cylinders shaved off, but twice the ambition. Top 1, 2005 Ford Mustang GT 4.6 LV8 base auto. It looked like a legend reborn. It sounded like a muscle car revival. But for those who picked the automatic, the 2005 Mustang GT was a classic case of beauty over brawn. A performance mirage that faded the moment you floored it. Because while the body screamed heritage muscle, the drivetrain in this spec whispered missed opportunity. By the early 2000s, the Mustang had lost its identity. After decades of design drift, lackluster powertrains, and confusing trim levels, enthusiasts were begging for a return to form. Ford answered that call with the 2005 Mustang, introducing the S197 platform, a total reinvention that finally brought the car's spirit back to its 1960s glory days. This wasn't just a visual update, it was a cultural reset. With its long hood, fastback profile, tri-bar taillights, and galloping pony grille, the 2005 Mustang GT looked like it had driven straight out of a Steve McQueen chase scene. The cabin, too, evoked the past. Retro gauges, chrome-ringed vents, and aluminum-looked trim that gave it just the right amount of old-school charm. But it wasn't all nostalgia. Under the hood sat a 4.6-liter modular V8, now making 300 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque, a significant bump over the outgoing model. It was the most powerful Mustang GT in decades. On paper, this was a return to dominance. Ford finally had something that could take on the reborn Camaro, Dodge's muscle revival, and maybe even nip at the heels of more expensive European rivals. With a 5-speed manual, the car came alive. It could rip from 0 to 60 in just over 5 seconds and complete the quarter mile in the low 13s. That kind of performance would have embarrassed even a 1969 Boss 322, all while offering modern reliability, crash safety, and air conditioning. It was, in many ways, the muscle car reborn. But then came the choice. Buyers had to decide, manual or automatic, and for thousands of customers, daily drivers, commuters, casual enthusiasts, they chose the automatic. Specifically, the 5R55 S5 Speed Auto. It promised smoothness, convenience, and hassle-free driving in traffic, and Ford marketed it as the perfect blend of old-school muscle and modern comfort. But here's the truth, that automatic transmission dragged the entire experience down. Throttle response became dull, shifts came late, and the torque curve that made the 5 so addictive in the 80s now felt muted. That initial kick off the line, the violent burst of acceleration you expected, was replaced with a soft nudge and a moment of hesitation. Even the sound betrayed you. The car still growled, but it didn't go. Performance figures told the story clearly. The automatic GT took over 6 seconds to reach 60 mph. That's a full second slower than the manual. In muscle car terms, that's an eternity. It meant getting beat off the line by V6 imports, or worse, by the exact same Mustang, just with the right gearbox. And it didn't end there. Ford paired the automatic with slightly softer suspension tuning, likely to cater to the grand touring crowd. The result? A looser feel through corners, a touch more body roll, and reduced road feedback. It was still competent, but it lacked the edge that defined a proper pony car. Inside, the retro cabin still looked great. The layout was driver-centric, the materials a step up from the SN95 era, and the optional Shaker 500 sound system could blast classic rock with pride. But the thrill faded quickly when the car didn't deliver on what the visuals promised. You'd press the gas, hear that iconic V8 rumble, and then wait for the acceleration to catch up. It was style without substance if you chose the wrong spec. The 2005 Mustang GT Automatic wasn't a failure, but it was a compromise. A gorgeous, growling, retro-modern muscle machine, hobbled by a transmission that just didn't belong. For buyers hoping to channel the spirit of old-school street fights and quarter-mile glory, it was a letdown. And while the Mustang's body looked ready for war, its heart was chained by convenience. As Ford looked toward the future, toward superchargers, track packages, and Shelby variants, a question lingered. Could they finally create a Mustang that looked the part and delivered, no matter what gearbox you picked? Or was the automatic destined to remain the Achilles heel of an otherwise glorious comeback? If you've made it this far, you now know the truth. Not all V8 Mustangs were born to dominate. Some were legends on the outside, but sluggish secrets on the inside. Which of these underperformers surprised you the most? Or did we miss a Mustang that deserves a spot on this Hall of Shame? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because at Top 5 Muscle Cars, your voice fuels our engine. Make sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed this ride through Mustang history, subscribe for more forgotten beasts and misunderstood legends, and turn on the bell so you never miss another twist in automotive lore. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes even the loudest Mustangs are just sheep in wolf's clothing.